Welcome to Philosophy from the Frontline. This podcast explores the intersection of philosophy, entrepreneurship, and veteran transition. Join us as we delve into the minds of successful entrepreneurs who have made the journey from military service into small business ownership. Our guests will share their insights, experience, and unique perspectives on life, business, and the world around us. Through deep conversations and thought-provoking discussions, we hope to inspire and empower our listeners to tackle their own challenges and achieve their dreams. So sit back, relax, and get ready to explore the world of entrepreneurship from a veteran's point of view. This is Philosophy from the Frontline, and we'll see you on the high ground. Hey, welcome back to Philosophy from the Frontline. This is episode number 116 with Jack Oujo. This is going to be a unique one as a first for the show for me, as having a non-veteran but an entrepreneur on the show. And however, if you look into his background, and we were talking about that in the pre-show, that he was right in the same spot as a young career junior military officer when he had to make a large pivot in his life, and that pivot led to success. But I will not steal your thunder, so let's start with your origin story. Where are you from? What led you to pick the career field you chose? And I'm being intentionally cagey here because I want you to talk about it, because I think it's a super unique opportunity that when I read your background, I was like, I don't think that ever popped up on my bingo card. But without further ado, I'll pass it over to you, Jack, and let's get to your background. Thanks.
Well, first of all, Robert, thank you very much for having me on. I'm very honored to be on this podcast, especially with the quality of your listeners. I appreciate everything you guys do. So I want to start with that. But my background, it sounds very unusual being a baseball umpire, but it's actually kind of logical if you think about it. I was a catcher on a state championship baseball team when I was in high school, and my parents had no money to send me to college. And my next door neighbor growing up was a guy named Ed Sanicki, played on the Philadelphia Phillies in the 1950s, had a home run in his first at bat in the major leagues off of Rip Sewell. And he umpired as a hobby. And when I was looking to make some extra money, he suggested to me that I try umpiring. And I thought he was nuts. I'm going to go out there and get yelled at by all these crazy freaking people. And he said, well, you're a catcher. I think you'd be good at it. So I tried it, and I ended up officiating my way through college. By the time I graduated college, I was umpiring high school state championship games. They're trying to sneak me in on college games. And I decided, I had an accounting degree from Seton Hall University that I secured. And I decided I'm going to try out for baseball, try out for umpire school. They probably won't take me, but when I reach the age I'm at now, which is 67, I don't want to have any regrets in my life. So I'm going to try this. And I went down to umpire school. They took 13 people out of 350 to go into the minor leagues. And I ranked in the top 5. So that was good. And then when I went in the minor leagues, I figured, well, after a year or two, they'll probably get rid of me, realize I'm not that good, and life will move on for my accounting degree. And I started going through the minor leagues very quickly. Only 2 years in A-ball, 2 years in AA. I went to AAA. And after my third year in AAA, they put in a policy that if you had 3 years in AAA and the major leagues hadn't taken you, you were going to get thrown out of the game. You're going to get released. Oh, wow. Yeah. And there's people that have just retired from the major leagues that I beat to AA and AAA, but I guess my timing was off a little bit. And I found myself at age 30 with no money and a pregnant wife and ready to go, start your life all over again. So that's the situation I was in and how I got there.
Oh, and that's impressive. So two things I hear is passion at an early age. And that's typically, most veterans kind of figure out what they want to do early, and then the other part of it is taking that passion and turning it into something that you can make money off of. And that's probably the harder part of the two. Figuring out what you want to do is pretty easy. How to monetize it, not so much. And so, I hear, in your story, got a degree, which is, one of the great parts of the thing is hey, get a functional one. There's lots of degrees out there that are that you're going to pay for college, but there's not a lot of degrees that are going to pay you back once you're done.
Yeah, I was highly influenced by a book I read in the Dominican Republic by Lee Iacocca, the former Chrysler chairman, who advised anybody that was going into business to get as much education as you can, but then you got to do something with it. Yeah. Not one of these stupid degrees that doesn't get you anything. So even though accounting can be pretty freaking boring, it was a marketable job skill. Let's put it that way. You can always have a job. So what I did was when I got released from baseball, I was depressed because baseball was my identity. It really was. And, you know, all your friends that want free tickets to the games and all this other stuff, you could just imagine what that was like. So I made a decision that I was going to try and get a job in public accounting. And my wife and I, the weekend I got released, put my resume together, and we identified 50 possible firms that I could work for. And I ended up getting hired by Ernst & Young. I literally knocked on the door at 51st Street and 7th Avenue in New York City. And they hired a released minor league umpire to work in their tax department doing tax returns for rich people. And over the next 4 years, to deal with this depression, I went to school and I studied every single night. I don't think I watched a baseball game for 3 years.
Wow.
And within a 3-year period, I passed all 4 parts of the CPA exam. I passed all 4 on my first sitting after being in baseball 8 years. Passed the CFP exam. I got securities license, insurance license, and I got a master's degree in taxation. I didn't even know wealth management was a freaking business at that time. I was just following Lee Iacocca's advice. And when I put myself out there, I had a partner. And again, I had no money. We borrowed on credit cards to start the business. We made a written plan and we put math into the plan. What are our revenues going to look like, our expenses? But again, we had no money. But we did have a written plan. And after a couple of years, the business just freaking took off. I went from making $50,000, $60,000 a year for several years. And then in like the 5th year, it rose to $200,000. And by the 7th year, I was making more money than the highest paid umpire in Major League Baseball. Okay. And then the business just crushed after that. And these rich people, and again, for somebody like in the military with your background, which is very attractive to people in the business world, by the way, is that these wealthy people are like, well, you understand this, you have this knowledge, you get it. And I guess the baseball background, you know, not being afraid to make tough decisions under intensive pressure, dealing with people on their worst behavior, being part of a team, all the things that you're learning in the military translate very well into the business world.
Yeah, and I think you make a really good point. So, you know, one of the things I talk about, and I talked about it with a couple episodes back with Jake from Certus Corps, and we talked about stress inoculation, right? So, like, being an umpire is probably a stressful job. And the other part of it is there's a lot of learning that goes to it. Like, if you've ever picked up a rule book for baseball, football, or any major sport, like, those rule books are pretty thick. And you have to, and it's not just having a working knowledge, you have to have an intimate knowledge of that information. And so studying is part of it. And so for, you know, those of you that are out there that like have been able to get by without studying, like success in, you know, a new endeavor requires you to study more, right? Like you may be great in the military because like it comes to you naturally. Leadership may be a natural, you know, part of your character or part of who you are, but going into, you know, a CPA exam, that's difficult. Like, man, I think the hardest test I've ever taken ever in my life was, you know, my FAA Part 107 so I could fly drones legally, right? You go into a Pearson View testing center, they lock the doors, you got headphones on, there's cameras everywhere, and you're like, dude, it's just for a, you know what I mean? It's for a small piece of plastic that, yeah, it could cause a fatal injury or whatever, but at the end of the day, you know, that level of intensity is not something that's common, but if you've had stressful situations before, you're like, okay, this is kind of weird, but I'll get by, you know? And I think, you know, being able to do that is important. And, you know, the transition point I like to go back to a little bit because you said, you know, you're 30 years old with a pregnant wife. That's like the target audience for a junior military officer when they have to make that decision between 5 and 7 years of getting out. And typically the conditions may not be as drastic, but that's still a transition point. And so, you know, when you were leaving, when you were told like, hey, we don't need your services anymore. How did you, you know, again, I'm sure that was not fun, but I think the other part of it is like, how did you take that? Because I know, you know, in that situation, you were probably doing pretty well up until that point. And then all of a sudden the dynamic shifted. And that's something that happens to military and veterans all the time too. Like, hey, you're doing great. You're trending upward. Then all of a sudden you're told that you're not. So, you know, how did you deal with that?
You have to have a core belief in yourself, which I did. I believed I got a really bad deal from baseball, and I believed I was cheated out of a career in Major League Baseball. And my belief was, if that's true, if I am right in that assumption, as the 30-year-old version of myself, then if I go into business, okay, and put in the same work and work really smart, my chances of being successful in business are far greater than they're ever going to be being in Major League Baseball. I think most people would agree with that. And so anybody that's making this transition really has to have a lot of self-confidence and belief. And it really helps if you have a supportive spouse or partner. That's a big deal, because in this world we live in, where there's so much negativity, I never realized how miserable human beings were until the internet evolved, is you're going to have so many people telling you that you can't do things. And I'm telling you, and I'm telling all the guys out there and gals, that it's a great world out there. And I don't think competing is really all that difficult. There's an old saying, there's no traffic on the extra mile. And I believe if people put in the work and they do it smart, in a smart way, they can be very successful. One piece of advice I'd give to people is, whatever it is that you want to do, I would seek out other people that are doing what you may aspire to do, like you're doing on this podcast, and seek them out and ask them out to lunch or breakfast, or go out for a drink and say, what did you do? Do you like it? How much money do you make? Okay, how does that work? And ask probing questions, and people are more than willing to share their knowledge with you. I would say, because I met with a lot of financial advisors. I called the broker dealer and I go, who are the top 5 advisors in this firm? Tell me who they are. And I called them up. I even flew one in from North Carolina, okay, put them up in a hotel and just probed what they had to say. And I learned so much. It saved me 10 years of making mistakes in my business. So I think that's a very important thing for anybody to do that's trying to reinvent themselves or start over. And I would not take any freaking shortcuts. You can't have the attitude that I just did 8 years in baseball or the military, and therefore, because I did this work, I'm entitled to something to start at the top. Do the work, humble yourself, go back, okay? And the lessons you learned in the military, plus what you learn in your new endeavor, should serve you very well, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's a great point. And understanding that sense of entitlement. Like, if I've heard the microwave society, I've heard other different things, like, but basically what it boils down to is like, hey, I'm me, therefore you should, love me, cherish me, give me everything that I ask for. And, typically our experience is, the best things that you have are the things that you earn, right? Like, if I give you something, you're not going to take care of it as much as if you built it with your own hands. And I think that part of it is very important. And so as a veteran, you have to take all those hard lessons that you learn, like on the battlefield or in training or all those experiences, and realize that's 100% a part of you, and it's not going away. Just like you were an umpire in baseball, you spent some time in that career and you dedicated yourself to that. But things change, but it doesn't mean that like your passion for that has gone away. It just means like now I have to direct that passion and energy into something else to give myself the opportunity to be successful. And that's hard for a lot of people. It really is. And it's not a common reaction to that type of stimulus.
The thing I would say to somebody, though, like, if I had to thank, besides my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, if I had to thank anybody else, it would be that 30 to 35-year-old version of myself that did all this work so that we have this great life right now. Like you have to go into the abyss almost for a few years to reinvent yourself. Okay, but on the other side of that, the other side of that investment is a huge dividend that's going to benefit you, your partner, children, for possibly generations, if you do this work in a smart, intelligent way. Because, by the way, the years are going to pass. The time is going to pass anyway. Yeah. You might as well really throw yourself into these things and try so hard all over again. And on the other side of it, there's a lot of good. There's really a lot of good.
Yeah. So, and one of the things that you mentioned, and we're not going to gloss over it because it's important, right? So the faith component, as well as, your relationships, your spouse is very important, right? And one of the things that we used to say early in the military, before everything was Velcro, is make sure the last name on your uniform is the one that you bought in. And that meaning is like your family is still intact, because through that process, there's going to be hardship, and everybody goes through a rough time, but statistically you're happier, healthier, and can accomplish more when you're in a relationship with somebody that loves you and supports you. And if that's not you, all right, keep looking. But if it is you, keep the team together, because like building a team is one of the hardest things you can do, but building a family is even harder. And so a supportive spouse. Like I would not be sitting here today if it wasn't for, my wife, who put up with the 5 deployments and being out of the house. Like, we were newlyweds until I retired because I left so much. Yep. So understanding that relationships are incredibly important, but, keeping your family intact. And sometimes you have to make a decision to pay the bills versus, like, not everything is going to be a large financial windfall.
If I could interrupt you a second, Robert, because there's a lot of similarities between that and what I went through in baseball. I received great advice. The old umpire, Dutch Rennert, had that big booming strike one call when he umpired in the major leagues. And I met with his wife, Shirley Rennert, at the Dodgers spring training. And I told her how concerned I was because I was on a good track for the major leagues. And I was concerned about being away from home so much. And she said, without meaning it, you're being very demeaning to women. And I go, how so? And she goes, you need to marry somebody that's independent, somebody that doesn't need you every second of the day, but somebody that loves you. And if you've been in the military with a supportive spouse, you already have one of the biggest pieces of equipment you need to be successful at the next level. Okay. Because if somebody's been with you through this and your relationship is still great, and I think this is really important, by the way, whatever it is you can go into, you should be able to weather that. And again, on the other side, there's a really great life out there. We live in a capitalistic society. I learned as an umpire I was on the wrong side of capitalism, and I learned how capitalism works. And I wanted to be on the right side of it my next career. Okay. And you get disproportionately rewarded in America. All the stories about income inequality, they're all true. Okay. But you want to be on the other side of that. And if you have leadership skills, all the things you've learned in the military, that translates real well into the freaking business world. It really does. People just need to have that core belief in themselves and then work smart to achieve those goals.
Yeah. And I think the other piece of that conversation is like understanding your worth, right? And most military veterans, and I say this all the time, like, unless you build your own business, you're probably never going to get paid the amount of money for the amount of work that you put in. That's just the way that it is, right? Being an entrepreneur is probably, again, one of the most rewarding things that you can do, but you have to start somewhere, and you probably have to start small, right? And one of the pieces of advice that I give everybody, and we'll get on a soapbox really quick, but the 2 pieces of advice that I would give everybody is, like, when you make staff sergeant or maybe first lieutenant, go ahead and start your LLC. It's $250 a year. You could write it off on your taxes. It could be first name, last name, LLC, right? And then you can start using that for other opportunities to, hey, I got to go take this business trip, or I'm going to go visit this place. All right, well, I can write half of it off because, I went and did an interview, or I went to check out a facility or something to that effect. So I can start building in, that tax navigation pipeline early in your military career. So then when you transition out, you have something that you can leverage when you get on the outside.
They should also, and this is the nerdy CPA in me talking right now, they should also, like I previously said, Robert, in addition to starting their LLC or whatever it is that they do, they ought to play around on a piece of paper or Excel spreadsheet or AI and have fun with the next 5 years or where revenues are going to be, what they project them to be, worst case scenario, best case scenarios, and see what that looks like. And when you put that stuff on paper and you look at it, you realize the actions that need to take place to make that goal or reality. And a lot of decisions then become self-evident in terms of what it is that you should be doing.
Yeah, that's a really good point too, is like have a strategy and a plan, right? And I think there's a lot of esoteric ways of doing it, right? So you have the people like, oh, build your vision board, or, do The Secret, or, all those other, like, kind of, I say squishy, right? For lack of a better term. They're very philosophical, but there's not a lot of tangible substance to them. But like, if you sit down and you write out an action plan, like, hey, this is what I'm going to do for the next 3 years, or this is what I'm going to do for the next 5 years. Or, hey, something as simple as, hey, I'm going to start, and we talk about Dave Ramsey, but like, hey, I'm going to build my debt snowball, right? Because I amassed some debt while I'm in the uniform. So how do I get out of debt by the time I'm out of the military?
I will say this regarding Dave Ramsey real quick with the debt, is that I'm a big proponent of people like my age right now having no mortgage, no debt. But when I started, and this is where I depart from Dave a little bit, is in the beginning, you need to borrow money to get into that home. You need to borrow for your business. Okay. There is good debt to start your business. Once you become an old man like me, we don't want any freaking part of debt. But at the beginning, you have to make an assessment of borrowing that money to get your life or your business going. You really need to do that in a smart way. You can't be debt free at 30 years of age and try to create a business.
Well, that's a fair point. Think about the 30-year-old kid that just moved out of his parents' house or is living in an apartment now because he doesn't have the means because he has no credit history. Right. Like, hey, I don't have any debt, but I also don't have a house. Right. So, I mean, there's some trade space there.
If you look at any company on the New York Stock Exchange, the reason why they're publicly traded and are allowing you to buy into their business is they needed money. Otherwise, they would have never went public. Okay? That's exhibit A for why people need to borrow money or give away equity in their company.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I appreciate that. And then the other piece of it is, and we'll go back to a little bit further or earlier in the conversation when you talked about, connecting with people that are in a specific career field that you like. And so one of the techniques that I tell people all the time, it's like I did a lot of night shifts towards the back end of my career in the Army. So what I would tell people is like, hey, look, when you're on night shift, get on LinkedIn. Get on those hiring platforms and have those conversations and say, find somebody in, 3 people a day for 30 days. And this is the challenge that I always give people, 3 people a day. So find somebody that you used to work for, find somebody that used to work for you, and then find somebody in the career field that you want to go into, and then engage those people. And guess what? It's the power of 3. So by the end of that, 30 days, I've connected with 90 people, but those 90 contacts turn into 270 because all those people are connected in the power of 3. And like, I don't care what platform it is. I just use LinkedIn as an example, but if you have the opportunity to connect with people like that, and then be respectful of someone's time. So it's like, hey, look, I'm going to talk to you for 20 minutes. At 19 minutes and 58 seconds, it's like, hey, I really appreciate your time. Got to go. Right. And that builds in some discipline, but it also allows you to connect with people that may like there's people that I used to work with that are making more money than me, And so it's like having that dialogue can change your perspective, particularly as you start getting towards the end of your career.
Yeah, and have fun with it too. Okay, like look for something that try to choose your life, your ideal life. There's going to be ebbs and flows, setbacks along the way, but try to choose your life. And again, ask these questions. You're going to find out. I think people are going to find out very quickly when they look into things. I have 3 adult children right now. And they're all in careers that have nothing to do with what I did. But I gave them the advice that you just gave, Robert, is to seek these people out. I look at my middle child, always wanted to be a pilot, playing those stupid video games online. It used to drive me crazy. And I brought pilots into the house. Okay. I brought pilots into the house and they sat with them and said, connect these dots. You could have a nice career for yourself. And at 32 years of age, he became a captain with Alaska Airlines. Captain.
Wow.
Okay. So I don't know the first thing about being a freaking pilot or how that worked, but I was smart enough to bring in people to counsel him. Okay. Same thing with my other 2 kids. There's similar stories. So it not just you, but for your children, it pays off to do things like that.
Yeah. And one of the notes that I saw in your bio is talking about the plan B, right? And so you have people that always talk about like, oh, you don't need a plan B. If you don't have a plan B, if you don't have a plan B, it always keeps you on plan A, right? And those are the people that have the epic collapse when plan A does not work out, So as a point of advice or a point of, to the audience, like what's one way that like you can successfully plan for a plan B? I think we've talked about it a little bit, like putting things on paper. So you have a thumbnail sketch of where you want to go, but like, how do you advise, your clients or your people that you're working with? It's like, hey, so, I understand like this is where you want to be right now, but what happens if some drastic change happens, and how would you encourage them to make that plan B?
You always have to look at things as if they won't work out. You have to prepare for worst case scenarios. Everybody knows the basketball coach, Bobby Knight. Bobby Knight wrote a very good book called The Power of Negative Thinking, where he was talking about how basketball games are lost, not won. In my business, I always ran through worst case scenarios when planning finances for my client, not ideal scenarios, worst case scenarios. Mm-hmm. You can have a positive life and a positive outlook on life, but when you look at worst case scenarios, it actually makes you a happier person. How could that possibly be? when I was planning my plan B, I said to my wife, I said, the worst thing that can happen to us after these 5 years is I'm going to have student loans to pay and a lot of freaking knowledge. I can't think of, that's the only thing. And maybe I put in, instead of watching TV at night, I was studying for the CPA exam or something along that lines. That's not so bad. Okay. When people look at worst case scenarios, they're going to find they're not so horrible, especially if you have a good partner involved. And it helps you go after things in a more positive way, if I'm making sense there.
No, it makes perfect sense. And again, that's what, it's a very military thing. So what you just said is like putting it into perspective of military planning, right? You most likely, most dangerous courses of action that the enemy is going to do to you, right? So if I'm planning for the most likely, like this is probably what I think is going to happen based off of the trends that I've seen. So it's like, if I invest in this certain technology company, I'm going to make so much in, profit every year. This is why they pay their shares off, or, dividends or whatnot. Right. Or I can go into the highly volatile market knowing full well that that's probably going to give me, a much greater return in a shorter amount of time. And it's the same thing in the military, because it's like, hey, look, I got to be prepared for the worst case scenario. So like if the bottom drops out and 500 people charge me and they all got machine guns, like that is bad. Like if I run into an organization or run into somebody on the battlefield and they've got one machine gun, well, okay, that's not as bad as 50 people with a machine gun. And so being able to structurally break that stuff down and come up with something, and there's usually, I always say there's 4 courses of action, right? The first one is do nothing. That's not a course of action, but it actually is, no action is an action. And then you have to think best case, worst case, and somewhere in the middle. And usually somewhere in the middle is where life kind of happens, but you have to plan basically for all contingencies so you have the best outcome for yourself and the people around you.
Yeah. The thing I want to just get across to your viewers or listeners is I don't think they realize just how much education they've gotten through the military. Like as somebody in business, I'd hate to compete against a guy like you. With all the discipline you have, the only difference between me and you is you haven't done those 4 years of school, if you will, or haven't gotten that other part of the equipment. And once somebody has that, if you have the leadership and talent and personality to go along with the skill set, whatever it is you do, you guys are going to crush. Okay. You would do so well. And I'm just telling you that I know it for a fact, because a lot of people in the business world just don't have that discipline and teamwork. And people look for that, whether you're self-employed and your customers or clients are looking for that, or whether you're working for a big corporation, which I'm anti. I'm the type of guy, after my experience in baseball, I wanted to be self-employed because I wanted the cause and effect. I didn't want to rely, I thought in corporate America, if you wanted loyalty, you should get a dog, something along those lines.
Wow.
I wanted the cause and effect of being self-employed. That's just me. But it's up to the people listening.
Yeah, and I try and illuminate to people too. So like after years of being in the military, all I wanted to do is work. I wanted to find a job with a purpose that allows me to make some money, but I can do that for 10, 15 years and like not have to make decisions, right? And I say that because I was in charge for a very long time in my military career. So it's like, look, I will be an employee. Just be a good leader. If you're a good leader, we can work together. If you're not a good leader, then we're going to have a problem. And I've, had the experience of working for a company that was like, hey, we need you to write a strategy. Well, I'm a school trained strategist. So if you ask me to write a strategy, I'm going to make your head hurt because it's not what you're expecting. And so when you present information like that, it goes back to your previous point. It's like, hey, look, if I'm bringing more tools to the, to the workplace than another person, it's going to show. At least in the military, we value that. Like, oh yeah, like, hey, I might not be the best shot in the platoon, but he is. So I'm going to make sure that guy always has ammo, always has food, and he's always covering me because he's the best dude for that job. In the corporate environment, particularly like the guys that are desperate to make money, and that's probably the easiest way. It's like, hey, look, we're at revenue, but not profit. You know what I mean? Like we're not turning the profit that we need to. We're running right underneath the black, And so like, how do I create that opportunity? And I see it happen all the time that there's a lot of people that have great ideas, and that's the other part is like, but can I market that idea and make it profitable? Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't, right? Like right now, doing this podcast, this is a hobby. If somebody were to offer me like a full-time opportunity to do podcast, I don't know if I would take it. I might, but the reason why I would take it is the compensation would tie with the purpose, right? Because sometimes you do things, that are purposeful but may not compensate you, and that's okay. But that's a conscious decision that I'm making to be this way.
Absolutely. And you got to remember, you are a brand, right?
Yeah.
So you're building up your own brand, which something else could benefit down the road. When I wrote my book, Too Smart to Be an Umpire, I'm an accountant. I know there's no money writing books unless I'm a celebrity. It did strengthen the brand of my business, and it may lead to some other opportunities in retirement. That's all. I mean, I knew the math on the whole thing. I'm not expecting to make it a dime off of a book, even though the public thinks that you write a best-selling book that you become rich. You don't. I know how the math works on that. And that's why you got to look at things. What are you getting out of the work that you're putting into something?
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point too. Is just like, yeah, there's going to be some things that like don't always financially compensate you, but there are, like there's no such thing as bad press, right? So like if I can get the right type of momentum from a discussion or interview or, photo op or whatever it is, and you take advantage of that and, you parlay that into something else. So it's like, hey, look, I've had people recognize me like, hey, I think I've listened to your podcast before. Okay, cool. Right. That to me, that's success, right? That's the win. The win is if you've listened to my podcast as a transitioning veteran and it helped you, that's the win, because, being able to impart wisdom is sometimes a better benefit than something financially. And I think people miss that, or it could be both, right? I can impart a piece of wisdom that leads to success financially, both of which are great. But I think, it's just understanding that things are the way that they are. I really appreciate you coming on today. I want to be respectful of your time. We're about at a half an hour, and I try and keep these like the average time of a commute, which is like 30 to 40 minutes. And so, give you the opportunity
my commute to New York back in the day was 2 hours each way. Woo. That's another reason why I decided to be self-employed. Yeah, but anyway,
that's certainly a little bit of a drive. But yeah, so is there anything else that you want to plug? Because I know you have your website, and is there any other opportunities or organizations that you work with or you advise that you want the listeners to know about?
Yeah, they can find out a lot about me if they go on the book's website, toosmarttobeanumpire.com. They can see why that's the title on there, or Oujo Wealth Strategies. But I would advise people really have confidence that what you've learned in the military is very attractive to people in the business world. It really is. And that to really think about the reinvention process of putting things together with math and having a core belief in yourself that it's a wonderful world. There's a lot of stupid people out there that are multimillionaires because they didn't have much competition, because people like you didn't think they were good enough to compete with them when they really were. So have confidence in yourself and go for it.
Yeah. And that's a great message. And I really appreciate you coming on today. Like this has been refreshing, right? So typically I talk to veterans, and veterans are always good. We all have great stories, but sometimes it's good to get an outside perspective, and not to say that you're outside, because you've gone through several transitions in your life as well. And those transitions are critical to who you are today. And I think that's one of the things that if my audience listens to this and says, oh, hey, you know what? I don't have to be, because everybody, I won't say everyone. There's a lot of people that join the military and assume like, I'm going to stay in long enough to be a general. Well, only about 2% of every year group that comes in makes it to sergeant major and to general officer. So that's a long way to go. However, you can still end up on top if you leave the organization and find something that you're passionate about and you're willing to dedicate the time and effort to do so and grow into that capacity. So, yeah, we're going to wrap here for Jack Oujo, and this is Rob Robinson from Philosophy from the Frontline. This is episode number 116, and we will see you guys on the high ground. Thanks. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Philosophy from the Frontline. We hope today's conversation gave you valuable insights into the journey of veterans transitioning into the world of small business. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a review. It helps more people find us and supports our mission to empower veteran entrepreneurs. Stay connected with us on social media and visit our website for more resources, tips, and episodes. Remember, your service doesn't end when you take off the uniform. Your Your next mission is just beginning. Until next time, keep pushing forward, stay resilient, and turn your battle-tested skills into business success. This has been Philosophy from the Frontline, and we'll see you on the high ground. Thanks.